Labor Talks, recorded at Chippewa Valley Community Television in Eau Claire, Wisconsin.
Hello, and welcome to Labor Talks. Today's special guest is Russ Feingold. Russ is currently running for the U.S. Senate against Ron Johnson. Welcome to Labor Talks.
Good to be in the show. Thank you. It's a great show.
Good to have you here. Now, I'm sure everybody out there knows who you already are, but for those first-time voters, how about you tell us a little bit about you?
Well, I'm from Wisconsin, born and bred. My family came to Janesville in 1917, so next year it'll be 100 years in the state, and there's a fair number of us still here. Went to University of Wisconsin-Madison after graduating Janesville Public Schools. And I'm a lawyer by training, but I also spent 10 years in the Wisconsin State Senate, representing the area sort of around Madison, a lot of the rural area north and west of Madison. And then I was lucky in 1992, the people of the state elected me to the United States Senate, where I served for 18 years and was defeated in 2010, but had a wonderful period there where I got to serve the people of the state. And then, since then I've been able to teach some law school here and in other places in the country, and also served as President Obama's envoy or ambassador to Central Africa for a while, a couple years ago, when there was a terrible war going on there in Eastern Congo. I was working with people to try to negotiate some peace in a place where a lot of bad things were happening. So I've had a lot of great opportunities, but Badger through and through, and one of the reasons why I'm running for the Senate is how much I love this state.
It's good to have you back running, too. Can you tell us why you decided to run again for the Senate?
Yeah, look, I didn't assume after 2010 that I would ever run again, but what happened is that the people of this state were subjected to a terrible attack that seemingly came from nowhere. The Koch brothers, it seems, sort of gave the instructions to Scott Walker and people like Senator Johnson and said, we want you to go after the public employees first, and then we'll let you know what else you want you to do. So we know the protests that occurred, taking away the first state in the country that had public collective bargaining for public employees. And they had told the private unions, well, we're not going to go after you. And then as soon as that was over, they went after the private unions and turned us into a right-to-work state and took away the prevailing wage law. Then they went after the University of Wisconsin. Scott Walker cut $250 million out of the University of Wisconsin system. They weakened our environmental laws. They got rid of our campaign finance laws. They eliminated a 100-year-old civil service system. So I felt, as people kept talking to me and urging me to run for office again, that I had something to contribute to try to get us away from these people who are trying to divide us and get rid of the accomplishments of the progressive era in this state over the last 100 years. That's what my family's all been about for those 100 years. And so this is an out-of-state corporate operation that's taken over Wisconsin, and they call Senator Ron Johnson, the person I'm running against, their model legislator, because he almost always votes, with the big interests, the billionaires, the millionaires, and the people of the state deserve somebody who will listen to them and will vote with the working and middle-class families that are trying so hard to make ends meet. Their hard work should be rewarded. Right. They shouldn't have to work that hard and not have the fairness of being able to pay your bills and have a little time and money for your family. So that motivated me to get back in and try to run a strong, positive race that's about unifying Wisconsin, but also making sure that the working and middle-class families get the attention they deserve. They're not getting it now from Senator Johnson.
No, we feel like we've been taken back way more than 50 years, and that we've got a major uphill battle to bring it all back again.
And it has to start in 2016. It's not going to get all done in 2016. We're going to elect a Democratic president. We hope to get a majority in the United States Senate for the Democratic side, because not just because it's Democrat, but because the people that are running the Republican operation are complete obstructionists, not even filling a Supreme Court vacancy in an unprecedented way. Senator Johnson's all about that. So that's part of it, but then we also have to get the state back, and that's part of this too. And not only making some progress in the state assembly and the state senate, where we have very low numbers, but hopefully electing a different governor in 2018, and having a fairer and more legitimate reapportionment process in 2020. They really took that to town and manipulated the reapportionment in an unfair way that made it very unfair for those who happened to vote for Democrats. They didn't get anything out of it.
No. I live in one of those areas where I was
gerrymandered.
Yeah. So
they've gotten pretty good at it.
Yes, they have. What are some of the issues that you see as the most vital that we need to work on in the United States?
Well, the way I like to talk about that is it isn't what I think, it's what the people of Wisconsin think. And that is really how I go about it. Senator Johnson likes to put up charts and say, let me explain to you what the problems are. I look at it completely differently. What I think a representative has to do is not try to act like the big boss, but be the person who goes out and says, first of all, you tell me what the issues are. And so I went to all 72 counties last year. I went to all 72 counties already this year. We're going to a bunch of the counties again. We mostly have sort of spontaneous encounters. For example, you go into McDonald's and there's a group of people that always meet together for coffee and say they're solving the world's problems. Sit down and talk to them, talk to people on the street, talk to people in parades. The number one thing people say is what I've sort of already suggested, and that is that even though people at the top are doing well now, even though unemployment is lower than it was, middle income and working families are not seeing their money, their wages, their pay keep pace with their bills. And this is unfair. This is not the way we treat hard work in our society. Right. So it's not like they're jumping up and down or saying, let's take all the money from the rich. They're saying, how about a little balance? How about a little fairness? So that is the leading thing I hear. So in response, people say they want to see that minimum wage increase for the first time in a long time in the federal level. They say, why can't we have paid family leave for a young couple that has a child? They have that in almost every other industrial country. They want to see prescription drug costs come down for everybody, but especially for seniors. I'm on a statewide tour now talking to seniors, and you should hear how they react when you just mention the cost of prescription medicines. It doesn't have to be that way. The federal government could have a law that allows it to negotiate lower drug prices. And the other thing, of course, is that Social Security has to be protected as a public program. Senator Johnson believes he calls it a Ponzi scheme, like it's a joke or a fraud. And he said a few months ago again that it's, quote, a shame that Social Security wasn't privatized, which would have been terrible. So this is all about whether or not working families and the seniors in those families and others, students with their student loans, that somehow we act at the federal level, if I'm able to join the Senate, to create some balance here so the hard work that people do is rewarded in a fair way.
I have a mother and a mother-in-law who are in their 80s, so I know exactly what you're talking about with both medication, insurance costs, and a lot of the other things that are affecting them. And I have a brother and sister who are Vietnam era vets, and so the things that are affecting veterans, where my sister calls me and says, my appointment's been rescheduled again, or my appointment's been canceled again. And my brother's running all over the state because he can't get into Tomah, or he can't get into Milwaukee, or he can't get into Appleton. And it's sad to see that happening to our veterans.
That's the problem. Is sometimes people think of these people that we're talking about here as isolated people. Where there's seniors over here, and veteran over here, and a child here, and a student here. It's the same family. That's what we forget. These pressures affect the different generations within the families, and we have to look at the whole family unit as being very negatively affected when the wages aren't adequate, when student loans cost too much, when the VA isn't supported the way it should be, and people try to privatize it, which I think is not the way to go.
No, right.
So I think we need to think about the elements of family and community that are affected when people don't get rewarded properly for the hard work they're doing.
And then my husband is a robotics machinist, and you've met him before, where we've talked about jobs being shipped overseas. With these different trade agreements, the NAFTA, now the TPP, where do you stand on these trade agreements?
I stand clearly, as I always have, on this issue. When I was first elected to the United States Senate, NAFTA came up pretty fast, and even though President Clinton and Al Gore wanted me to vote for it, I refused to, because I wanted to stand with the working people of this state who told me that they thought that was going to cost us jobs. And sure enough, that's what happened. I opposed GATT, I opposed the China deal. Overall, those deals have cost Wisconsin 75,000 manufacturing jobs over the years. So this Trans-Pacific Partnership is clearly the same kind of a deal. It's like a corporate handshake. And I could cite you chapter and verse, but basically it became clear to me this is the same thing. Senator Johnson is the opposite on this issue. He has voted for all the trade agreements that have come before him, including the Korea deal, which has been bad, particularly for the steel industry. And now he's playing a little game, though, because we know he's for this TPP, even though I'm against it, because he's always for these deals. But he knows it's become unpopular, with Donald Trump and all this. So he's playing a little cat and mouse game. He says he has to review it very carefully, and he won't be able to tell us his stand until after the election. So this is somebody who says, I never do anything with my re-election in mind. This is totally political on his part. He doesn't even have the decency to tell the people of Wisconsin where he stands on something that is overwhelmingly important to the people of Wisconsin. I have always stood against bad trade agreements. These things greatly encourage companies to move overseas because of lower wages, not having to follow environmental regulations as much, not having to follow workers' rights issues as much. And, you know, this is not the way to go.
No accountability.
And it's essentially no accountability because it's really corporate people designated by these governments to cut the deal. And so, and one of the things that's disturbing about it, in addition to everything we've just talked about, is it empowers corporations, this TPP, to stand in the same place basically as governments. So they can sue in this sort of court made up by these corporate powers against laws that we've passed in the United States, like Buy American or a food safety law. They can try to basically get it knocked out by creating such big penalties. So that it undercuts our sovereignty, our right as Americans and Wisconsinites to protect ourselves. So it's a raw deal from many points of view, and in this race there's a clear difference. Myself, who opposes it, Senator Johnson, who clearly is for it but doesn't want to tell us the truth about it.
Well, and I think that a big part of what they're trying to do is not educate the public of what TPP really is. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, like you said, if we go, let's say, everything has to be Wisconsin-made for local jobs, local highways, that company can then, that steel company can come in and say, well, you just cost us millions of dollars, so now we're going to sue you because we want that money back. And they don't understand it. They really don't.
No, and that's how they want it. They want it to be this mysterious thing, keep it secret as much as they could. You know, people like Senator Johnson not even talking about what he feels about it, what he's going to do about it. Keep it secret, and corporations can keep controlling everything, just like they do across the board. I mean, you know, our campaign's theme is based on what I've already said. It's listening to people, and it's real clear that people want an economy that's not just for CEOs. They want an economy that works for everybody. And so when you finally get that job that's working for you, you don't want to see it suddenly shipped overseas because a couple of corporate interests made a deal at the negotiations for one of these lousy trade agreements.
Right. One, and I know we've discussed this with you before, is that my husband has never been in a job more than 10 years because of all these types of things. His jobs are the kind that do get shipped overseas. And it's really sad that he's got to cross the border to work in Minnesota to get a decent wage.
Yeah.
And then they're crying here in Wisconsin because they don't have enough trained tech people to do those jobs. But they're not going to stay here for a $10 cut in pay an hour.
Yeah, and I've seen this because I've toured here in this town and across the state, the technical colleges, which are just excellent, and many of them have these TAA, assistance programs that to train workers who've lost their jobs. And these are good programs that were part of the President's Recovery Act that I voted for. Senator Johnson voted against these programs when he had the chance. So what we learned in Milwaukee, in Wausau, here in Eau Claire, in all of them, is they all said the manufacturers and the employers are dying to get more people. They want more people to come out of that because the jobs are there. But I heard what you said, which is, you know, you go through all this training and you get the job, and all of a sudden, poof, it's gone. After you've done, you've already lost your job in order to get into that training program, and then you come out and it's gone again. So there has to be more job stability for working families.
And then with that in mind, how do we make college more affordable for our kids?
There's a lot of things we can do, and we have to do it. Things have changed dramatically to the point where college or technical higher education is very, very expensive, and people are coming out of college or other school with a terrible amount of debt that's really skewing their lives and making it very hard for them to start their lives in a reasonable way. Just one figure is, the average debt of a person who has debt for college coming out of University of Wisconsin-Madison is about $28,000. And my daughters one went to Eau Claire, one went to Madison. And it was expensive then, but now it's much higher, even just 10 years later. So this is wrong, and it's making basically denying the American dream for kids who are just saying, well, how do I buy a house? How do I buy a car? How do I do anything when I'm strapped with this? What can we do? A lot of things. One thing is we can pass Senator Elizabeth Warren's bill in the Senate, which would allow people to renegotiate a current high interest rate to a lower rate, like you can do with a mortgage refinancing. It's a reasonable bill. Senator Johnson votes against it. In fact, Senator Johnson's position is he doesn't believe there should be any federal student loans at all. That's his philosophical position. And, so what's the answer for somebody? How are you supposed to go to college? I guess you have to figure out how to get born in the right family under that scenario. So I, of course, would support Senator Warren's bill. I would vote for it. I'd co-sponsor it. I'd try to help her round up the 60 votes to get it done and send it to, I hope, a Democrat president as soon as we can. So that's one thing we can do. But there are other things. Now if there's more money made off of these interest rates that are going to the federal government, the money's used for the general fund. That should be put back into making college more affordable. We should change that. The forms that students, young people get when they get accepted are overwhelmingly complicated. And apparently, I've asked a lot of students about this all over the state. Apparently, it's really hard to get help with that. We need to simplify that. And finally, we need to do something like what Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton came together on this week. They're coming together now. And the first thing they came together on was a really great plan to try to figure out how to have the federal government, state governments, universities, and families and students come together to get the cost down. So it'd sort of be a block grant from the federal government in return for state governments doing what they used to do, which is to help pay for tuition. That's the way it was when I went to the University of Wisconsin and for you. And ask everybody to help share some of the burden. But there's a lot of great provisions in there about renegotiating the interest rates, if you do public service for a couple of years, getting relief, if you're starting a small business, getting relief, like a whole bunch of really cool ideas. And this is what we should be talking
Similar
about.
to the kids that go through ROTC and into the military.
That's right.
They help, so now you come and spend a couple of years giving back.
So Hillary Clinton, with the support, I hope, of a strong Senate, I think would be able to move legislation that would give genuine and substantial relief toward the goal of having people come out of college or technical college with a debt-free tuition. Not necessarily all the costs, but at least not a debt related to the tuition.
They can't move ahead for years.
Yeah, so they just not straddle with that debt.
And as those kids move into families, how do we enact paid family leave for them?
That's a real simple one. You just pass it as a law. I mean, we started off under President Clinton with some of the child care provisions and others, and there are state legislators trying to do things like that in Wisconsin. You could pass a fairly simple bill like other countries have, saying that employers need to offer a reasonable amount of paid family leave for people.
And then preserving the mortgage interest deduction. I have an office in my home, and that mortgage interest deduction really helps us as a middle-class family. So I think that's really important, more so than that loophole for the corporations.
Exactly.
For move their headquarters out of here and then rent their buildings out. How do we close those loopholes and preserve that mortgage?
Well, again, this shows a contrast in the Senate race. Senator Johnson doesn't get this. He says he'd put the mortgage interest deduction on the table to renegotiate it away, but yet he supports a $40 billion oil and gas depletion allowance for the big oil and gas companies. Now, I'm from the middle class background, a middle class person. And so for me, the mortgage interest deduction has always been really important, as is the ability to deduct state and local taxes, because we have high property taxes. I'm not going to support negotiating that away for some deal while, we keep these horrific deals for the big corporations that use unlimited campaign contributions. So I would strongly oppose any attempt to get rid of the mortgage interest deduction. It is very important for part of the American dream of home ownership, and it's the kind of thing, along with the other things we talked about, that have to be part of the mix if working families are going to be able to say that their hard work is being properly rewarded. Having a home is a real important thing to the people who seek it, and we're not talking about handing it to them. What we're talking about is making sure that if they pay a lot of interest on the mortgage, they can deduct it.
And then home improvements and things like that with the roofing industry, where all the shingles have been shot, so people got to replace a roof on a brand new house. Yep. So it puts them that much further back in a hole again.
That's right. You got to paint your house, and I had that experience last year. You get the estimate, and you go, "Good Lord," But it was looking a little shabby, so you do it, and it's not easy. It's one thing if your wages are working and you're sort of able to put away a little bit, you got a little rainy day fund. But that's not what's happening for people now.
No, and that's the other thing too, is we have to raise the minimum wage.
Absolutely.
And I know there are people that are saying, well, you can't just bam do it. It's got to be more of a staggered thing. I mean, where do you stand on, or how do you feel we should do that?
All the proposals suggest doing it over a series of years, but the question is how much you're going to willing to raise it. You know, right now it's at $7.25 both nationally and in Wisconsin. It's ridiculously low. And yet Senator Johnson's position is there shouldn't even be a federal minimum wage. So I think I certainly support raising it as high as $15, the fight for 15. And even that proposal is one that gets phased in over time. But the excuse that you know, sort of, well, we don't know how it's going to get, so we're not going to do anything. Hey, let's bring this up in Congress, those who are there, if I'm lucky enough to be there, and let's debate it. But we do know that $7.25 is ridiculously low and does not reflect reality.
Even if they went to 10% above poverty, which is 12, it's still poverty.
Yeah.
And they're creating a major divide between workers that have been working, like my husband, and the McDonald's people, for instance.
Yeah.
Because my husband, as a robotics machinist with all those years of schooling, my sister-in-law, who's a principal of a school, and they're like, okay, but what about our wage? We aren't going to let them get more than us. And they're creating that friction between the two groups. And that's another place where we need to educate everybody.
The goal here always is to divide and conquer, pit people against each other. This is what Scott Walker and others did, trying to pit the private unions against the public employees. And that's the game. And we here in Wisconsin have to stand together as a human community, as an economic community, and realize that if we do that, we're going to do better financially. To be divided in this way only hurts us financially, not to mention a lot of Thanksgiving dinners, they have rules now where people aren't allowed to talk politics anymore.
That's the way it is in my house.
It's become pretty common.
And Christmas too.
Yeah.
But living where I live in St. Croix County, where it's a bedroom community, everybody works, and I'm a local elected official on the village board there. All the news we get is Minnesota, everything. It's really hard to educate the people on the border that they need to look at what's going on in Wisconsin.
That's
if they
right.
compare the two states, we are so far behind Minnesota. And they have a governor there who ran on, I'm going to tax the rich. You know, I don't know what we can do to better educate and open up, because they certainly aren't getting it in the media.
Well, it's a real challenge, and I have a good story about this. You know, in Pepin, there's a nice restaurant there on the water, and try to go there once a year when I go to the counties. And apparently the people in the kitchen back a few years ago were excited that a United States Senator was there, and they asked me to come into the kitchen. And I came in, and nobody even realized who I was. They were looking for Paul Wellstone, you know. And so I went, well, actually, you're in Wisconsin. But so that's one of the reasons I do this personal visit to every county every year, because people in that area don't see a lot of the Wisconsin public figures. The stations in Twin Cities and Duluth try to put some stuff on there, but
Not
their
enough.
Main audience is, of course, Minnesota.
And when it's as expensive as it is.
Now the internet helps, and this is where we have to extend. We have up to 1 million people in this state that don't have adequate access to broadband, and that's an area. Yeah, a lot of people are upset about. But you see, that's an area where we are going to be able to get more coverage and information to people through the internet as the internet improves, and that can help balance this huge problem we have that nobody can really afford to buy television ads that would go into such a tiny bit of the market that they are in. And that the television stations themselves are not going to devote a huge percentage of their coverage to Wisconsin because most of their people are in Minnesota.
And like I said, it's a total different mentality over there, the way they respect their workers compared to here. Now, we talked about, protecting things for the retirees, protecting retirement security.
Absolutely. That's what we're doing roundtables or meetings about here today. In addition, we've already had meetings in La Crosse and Superior and Milwaukee and Green Bay. And there's 3 topics that really are very common. One is that Social Security has to be a public program, that we can't try to privatize it like Senator Johnson wants to do. In fact, I think a lot of people would like to see Social Security enhanced, and how do we pay for that? Well, we can ask people in the higher income brackets to pay a little more on that FICA tax. I think that's one way to help make a program work. So, that's the first thing, and people are very clear that I've been endorsed by the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare because I'm committed to the public nature of Social Security. Same thing for Medicare. Senator Johnson voted with Paul Ryan for a voucher system for Medicare, which is the first step toward turning this thing over to the same people, to the Wall Street people and to the big business that they always vote with. And I oppose that. I want Medicare. It's a good program. It could always use improvement, but we don't want to give people vouchers so that possibly they could run out as they get older. And then the third I already mentioned is prescription medicines. The horror stories about paying $400 for a single dose of something leads people sometimes to cut that pill in half and not medicate themselves as they're supposed to because they're trying to balance food and shelter and medicine. And we have got to have a senator who stands up to the pharmaceutical industry instead of doing exactly what they asked, which is what Senator Johnson has been doing.
We have to protect them. I mean, they've put all the years in working, building this state, and then to watch them go. And you're right. I mean, I work in insurance, so I see a lot of what's happening with our seniors. So is there anything else that you would like to add?
Just that, I really think being a representative means that not only do you constantly listen to people, but you also make sure that people have the belief that this social system we're in here will really work for them if they work hard. People are working hard. People deserve the opportunity to have some time to themselves. They're not asking for the moon. They just want to pay the bills and have a little time. We need to make sure that people feel that way again, instead of having wages be stagnant and then shipping jobs overseas for trade agreements that benefit big corporations. So that, that's a commitment that I've always had. People know that's the record I had. There's no question about that. And so I'm hoping that people will consider voting for me on November 8th, because they'll get a senator with a very different voting record and very different kind of activity in January if they do it.
You're my hero.
Well,
always
thank you.
Have been.
That's awfully kind. Thank you.
That's today's program. My thanks to the viewing audience and to Russ, who made today's program possible. My thanks also to those folks working behind our cameras, who not only make the show possible, but give us an outlet for our union and labor voices. A final note, Labor Talks is on channel 993 twice weekly, and you can also use your favorite search engines and keywords, Labor Talks and CBC TV, and find it on YouTube. Thank you, and thank you for listening today.
My pleasure.
Chippewa Valley Community Television is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, you can contact us by calling 715-839-5067 or on the web at www.cbctv.org.